very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Life is a seasonal occupation. The season's not that long, at best. And with all that's unfolding on our planet, it's growing shorter by the day. This is Dane Wigington with GeoengineeringWatch.org Radio, the Global Alert News Hour for March 11, 2017. It's a commercial-free news hour brought to you by GeoengineeringWatch.org, trying to cover as many dire headlines as we can in the time that we have without commercial interruption. This show's brought to you throughout Northern California, live broadcast on 1670 AM, 104.9 FM, and 105.7 FM. The Global Alert News Hour is also aired by the PRN Radio Network on Saturdays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Recordings of this show can be found on GeoengineeringWatch.org under the Recent Radio and Top Stories sections and on the KQMS archives. As always stated, if you're in Shasta County, in the Redding area, Orchard Materials, we try to keep, to the degree we can, free informational materials there. We ask that you please put them to use, share them, copy them. Help to wake others up with these materials. That's the point. That's the purpose. Without a critical mass of wake up and awareness, nothing else can happen in a positive direction. Next library event in Redding, free public screening of a documentary film called Making a Killing, the untold story of psychotropic drugging. Many issues to address in our society today, but some of these core issues the public is so completely unaware of that it helps to expose the cancer that is our current system. Documentaries like this are part of that exposure. Starts at 2:30 Saturday, March 25th, the Reading Library, free materials are there. I'll be there for a Q&A after this film is done. Again, Reading City Library, March 25th, 2:30 p.m. The seemingly limitless arrogance of the human race is at times very difficult to comprehend. This notion that we can tech our way out of the damage already done with the same mindset that got us in this dilemma to begin with. And the media censorship of how drastically wrong things are going for the human race on every front is also truly astounding. Media censorship like KRCR in Reading and the Record Searchlight. Recently, a very dedicated and honest, honorable activist, Lori Bridgeford in the Reading area, went to KRCR to confront their anchor media news person, Mike Mangus. And Mike Mangus, in apparently aggressive terms, made clear to Ms. Bridgeford that KRCR will never cover the climate engineering issue. The Record Searchlight has already made that clear as well. And as I've stated in previous shows, not only did these mainstream corporate media entities in the Shasta County area refuse to cover the science issue that's on the front line topic of discussion for every science institution around the globe, every government around the globe, they also refused to give any coverage to huge community events that had attendance of 1,000+ people. This is media blackout of the most critical issues we face. Should we not consider such media blackouts and the media people behind them specifically as being accessories to crimes that they're helping to cover up? Why wouldn't we consider that? If these media people were given information about other critical issues or crimes and they refused to disclose that, would they not be held accountable? Why, with issues of such profound importance, like the deliberate, highly toxic, unimaginably destructive climate intervention programs, why is there a total refusal to cover this? And why are communities allowing this? When the KRCR quote, chief meteorologist Mike Kruger refuses any invitation to have a public dialogue to answer the questions of the population which he claims to represent, and he refuses to have any dialogue about the climate engineering issue, of which there is a mountain of science data to back up, film footage, so on and so forth, why does the population allow this sort of blackout? So my most sincere regard to Lori Bridgeford for her willingness to actually go to these media sources and confront them in their lobbies about why they are blacking out such a direly important film. If you want to meet Lori Bridgeford, she is an immense help in the Reading area. She will be at the next Reading Library event, always there, always dedicated, always committed, always in the front line of the fight. My deepest gratitude to you, Lori. Onward, the legal update. The GeoengineeringWatch.org legal team is still moving forward, never stopped, always working on the preparation for legal action to expose the heavy metal contamination that is a result of climate engineering. Freedom of Information Act requests have been deployed. I can't go into further detail. I will at the appropriate time and when I'm allowed by the attorneys. But the effort is ongoing, a very difficult effort, but one that we are absolutely making progress in. The entire system, and this must be considered in the United States, the entire system of checks, balances, public protection has been set up in a manner to specifically try to hide the heavy metal contamination that's happening all over the country, all over the world indeed, but in this country, great effort has been made to try to hide this contamination and to try to make the disclosure of this contamination very difficult. But we are working our way through that and making significant progress. I'll make more announcements as soon as I can. Another update on the Calvary Chapel that aired the Vax documentary some weeks ago. Apparently, that was as far as they are willing to go. They're apparently more worried, like most other spiritual institutions and environmental groups, as I've stated over and over, they're apparently more worried about their 501 nonprofit than they are telling the full truth. And that's quite a hypocrisy. I hope that changes. And I sent a large package of materials, commercial DVDs, commercial flyers, or colored glossy flyers to Calvary Chapel, have heard nothing back. I reached out to someone very high in their organization who I know personally and very well, an old relationship, to try to get any kind of response. Nothing. Zero. The comfort zone of so many institutions is being protected at the cost of planetary omnicide. Is that okay? Of course it's not okay. And if you're a member of any of these congregations, it's up to you to hold your church leaders accountable. If you're a member of an environmental organization, it's up to you to hold your organization's leaders accountable. And they are not accountable. The last time I saw the head of the Sierra Club in Northern California, after communicating with him for almost a decade, putting countless stacks of data before him on the climate engineering issue, he didn't even have the courage to stand in dialogue with me. He simply walked away because he's not willing to face this most dire issue. Head of the Sierra Club, if you're a member of the Sierra Club or Greenpeace or any of the other environmental institutions, and your organization is not addressing this issue, and we know they're not, it's up to you to hold them accountable. It's up to you to make them face the most dire environmental threat of all. And that's saying a lot because we've destroyed our environment in the geologic blink of an eye. You can't claim to care about the environment without facing the climate engineering issue first. You can't claim to care about the climate without discussing the climate engineering issue first. UV update. For those that have not seen the report I recently posted at geoengineeringwatch.org, I would highly recommend you do so. As I've stated in previous episodes, a former NASA aerospace avionics engineer is working directly with geoengineeringwatch.org to measure and monitor the extreme UV radiation levels now bombarding the planet due to the increasingly decimated ozone layer. This extreme radiation is not being disclosed by any official source. For those that have not read this dire report on how close our ozone layer is to completely collapsing, I would highly suggest, again, you do so. A total ozone layer collapse would mean the end of terrestrial life on Earth and most aquatic life. When does this engineer from NASA state that this will happen on the current course? 8 years. Think about that. It's already decimated. Within 8 years in the current course, we will likely have no ozone layer. End of the road. Read the report, read his statements if you care. And you can feel this on your face. And for those that have chosen to believe the sun feels hot because they're getting older or maybe more sensitive, that is not the case. Look at the tree trunks on many of the south-southwest facing trees. The bark is fried completely off those trees. The trees look horrible all over the world, in fact. This is a dire issue. Read the report. Earth's energy balance has been completely obliterated. That must be considered by everyone. You can't do what we're doing on the planet as a species, which includes climate engineering at the top of the list, but hardly the only issue. You can't engage in the environmentally destructive activities that our species has engaged in and not have a very big problem. So for the record, as I've stated before, the Earth is currently warming at the thermal energy equivalent rate of 4 to 5 Hiroshima bombs per second. 400,000 per day. That can't continue, clearly, or we won't be around much longer. Weather update. Snowstorm Reggie, the latest theatrically named snowstorm by the Weather Channel, more ice-nucleated events where temperatures swing from the 70s and 80s to snow in a day or less. How often do we see featureless skies completely canopied with the blend of aerosol, sprayed, toxic elements, and perhaps some natural cloud cover blended in? How often do we see this? And how rapidly are temperatures rising? And the only time they cool down now is when there's enough moisture to carry out a chemically nucleated, quote-unquote, winter storm event that they theatrically name. And how often do we see in commercials, for example, the dingy, whited-out skies? How often do we see blue skies and white clouds? Almost never. And how bad do the trees look in those commercials and film shoots in various locations? And for many who don't know trees very well and never bothered to look, if you know trees, you see how incredibly sick they are. And we still have trees all over Redding, by the way, in Northern California. And this is true in other parts of the country and the world. Still covered, fully foliated with dead leaves from last year. Why? Because all these leaves die at a particular rain event in the fall that there appears to possibly be some sort of defoliant in that mix to make it appear as if winter has set in. This is not a natural process. When you see trees around Redding that are fully foliated with dead leaves, and we're almost to spring, and these leaves are from last year, and you think that's normal, you don't know trees. The abscission hormone has not caused those leaves to fall. Something killed them on the trees, forced the tree into dormancy, and these chemicals exist. The fruit farmers have been using them for decades because it's not getting cold enough. So why at a certain rain in the fall, and many might claim this is a fungus or something else, that would not happen to multiple species at the same time during the same weather event? That's impossible. Something else is going on. And unless we know exactly what we're looking for in that particular precipitation sample, it's hard to find. But look for trees in Redding still foliated with dead leaves from last winter and ask yourself why you didn't notice that sooner. On the current course, our throwaway, grind-up nature for profit society is ending up like Easter Island. And for those that don't know what happened on Easter Island, I've used this example before. A population on a lush island with about 16 million palm trees ground up every bit of natural resource they had in order to erect monuments on that island. And they exploded in their population on a limited island. And what happened in the end? They were hiding in caves on the island and engaging in cannibalism. That's exactly what happened on Easter Island. I would recommend everyone to look at that scenario and compare it to our current scenario now. The global refugee crisis along this line of consideration will continue to explode, and though many media sources will blame military aggression and conflict for this refugee explosion, ultimately such aggression and conflict arises out of the desperate attempts by various power structures, including the US government and NATO, to acquire what's yet left of Earth's rapidly waning resources, which is directly connected to the core issue of biosphere and ecosystem collapse. As I've stated over and over and over, that's the bottom line. When the planet can't provide for the population that's here, the law of the jungle ensues. It's exactly what we have happening. Before getting to a long list of dire headlines, I want to make mention of a letter that was just sent to our legal team by an individual that seemed very angry about the fact that I had not, and I quote, confronted the White House and made them stop the spraying. The individual who penned this letter, again disgruntled about, in her eyes, my apparent lack of effort in this battle, because in her eyes, the only reason geoengineering was continuing to go on was because I hadn't confronted the White House yet. This individual felt that I should have produced some sort of magic petition that would force our government to stop their nefarious activity in our skies. I've heard from others that ask me why I'm not organizing protests all over the world, why I'm not doing atmospheric testing from aircraft all over the world, why haven't I run for office to put a stop to the spraying, why haven't I organized demonstrations at airports all over the world. I could go on, but the point is this. As I've always stated, and as I state now, there's no silver bullet for magically ending the insanity in our skies or countless other crimes of the power structure. In order for us to have any chance of forcing a change in direction for the human race, the masses must be awakened to reality, and that has not happened yet. The effort to bring about the awakening will require all of us, not just the efforts of a few. I'm still working an average of 80 hours a week, much of it behind the scenes, to try and further stoke the fires of awareness and awakening. This includes our legal effort, communications of critical information with countless people behind the scenes, the distribution of nearly 500,000, 500,000 of our color glossy informational flyers, and over 10,000 commercial DVDs, and a constant effort to utilize social media and independent media sources to help sound the alarm. This must be remembered and considered. A battle cannot be waged without an army of the awakened. An army of the awakened cannot be produced without an effective, efficient effort by many to awaken the masses, not just a few. The majority of populations have still never even heard of geoengineering and thus have no idea it's going on. What I find with those who are so quick to throw out criticism of existing activism efforts is this: they themselves typically are doing exactly nothing in the battle to help wake the masses, short of which no meaningful changes can be made. If the vast majority of the population is not yet alarmed enough at what's unfolding around them to even bother sharing dire information on social media, am I to believe these same individuals would show up at a peaceful demonstration at some distant location? Not going to happen. Not yet. Not yet. As the walls close in, and as they are given the information to understand why and how dire the situation is, that will change. Are we to believe that such individuals who would not show up at a protest or won't even share information on social media, are we to believe that they would take any of the needed activism steps that are so clearly laid out on the homepage of GeoengineeringWatch.org, and which are posted on each and every article from Geoengineering Watch? And this is imperative. So many people seem to miss this. They don't open the hyperlinks at the end of all of our articles. They never look on the homepage for activist suggestions. This must change. And with the criticizing individuals that have likely never even bothered to read or consider this information, please get in the game. Don't sit on the bench and throw bricks. Get in the game and actually help us to reach a critical mass of awareness. Here's the bottom line, and I'll get to the headlines. There's no easy way forward, no magic petition or process by which climate engineering will suddenly stop. We must all work together in the effort to bring these programs of planetary omnicide to light and to a halt. We must all work together to bring the rest of the power structure crimes to the full light of day as well. And for those that sit the bench, again, throwing out criticism while doing exactly nothing to help in the battle, please consider what you can do to actually help in the fight for the greater good. Many that are already aware of the climate engineering programs have long since abandoned the front lines of the battle. I hope that changes. Let's go over some headlines and try to weave them together. From counterpunch.org. Are we being set up for a national ID system? This is a report from John Whitehead, and it starts with a statement from Hannah Arendt reporting on the trial of Adolf Eichmann. Something to remember. Quote, "The triumph of the SS demands that the torture victim allow himself to be led to the noose without protesting, that he renounce and abandon himself to the point of ceasing to affirm his identity. And it is not for nothing. It is not gratuitously, out of sheer sadism, that the SS men desire his defeat. They know that the system which succeeds in destroying its victim before he mounts the scaffold is incomparably the best for keeping the whole people in slavery. The model is the same. It's exactly the same now as it was then during this trial of Adolf Eichmann." Something to consider. From Mr. Whitehead, You can't have it both ways. You can't live in a constitutional republic if you allow the government to act like a police state. You can't claim to value freedom if you allow the government to operate like a dictatorship. You can't expect to have your rights respected if you allow the government to treat whomever it pleases with disrespect and utter disregard for the rule of law. All that should be considered. Words of wisdom from John Whitehead. From True Publica. This is the source. Germany to censor press, social media, and internet ahead of elections. The walls are closing in. The noose is being pulled around all of our collective necks. Time to wake up. Another headline, important to consider, that plugs into what Mr. Whitehead just stated. Trump is bankrupting our nation to enrich the war profiteers. From that report. President Trump's calls for a military buildup are opening the fiscal floodgates for congressional hawks and defense industry contractors. On January 27th, Trump signed an executive order setting in motion a, quote, great rebuilding of the armed forces that will include new ships, new planes, and weapons of mass destruction, and the modernization of the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Just mentioned that. Presently, more than half of this year's congressional budget, some $610 billion of our income tax dollars, is allocated to Pentagon accounts, including overseas military operations and nuclear weapons. More on that story in a few minutes. Continuing from this report. Though the details were scarce, we can expect the Trump order to align with the proposals of Senator John McCain, what a twisted individual he is, chair of the Armed Services Committee. As reported in Politico, Senator McCain is now calling for large increases in his already bloated budget to $640 billion for fiscal year 2018 and $54 billion above the current budget projections. Adding in the $60 billion projected spending for Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and other interventions could bring the total Pentagon spending next year to more than $900 billion. The primary beneficiaries of such a buildup will be the large corporations that dominate weapons contracting, which includes Raytheon, major climate engineering player, includes Lockheed Martin, major climate engineering player. These are the people that are most directly engaged, the corporations most directly engaged in the atrocities in our skies and countless other atrocities. So consider that. This is what Trump is helping to fund. Finishing from this report, this is likely to be more than 60% of the total congressional discretionary budget. 60%. Two-thirds going into the military while the planet implodes around us and our environmental processes cease to function, which means we will not be here long if we remain on the current course. And I want to say this. For those that would make the argument that Trump must be good because the corporate media, like CNN, is attacking him, is that really a valid argument? Yes. CNN and the rest of the corporate media complex is as crooked and corrupt as they could be. But does that make Trump any less so? If two crime syndicates are infighting, does that make either one better than the other? I'm sorry to say that it appears Mr. Trump is playing the part of a perfectly tailored tool for the purpose of fueling societal division while simultaneously pumping up the military-industrial complex. For those that believe Trump is going to somehow save humanity from itself, truly such a notion should be completely abandoned and replaced with a long, hard look at reality. Trump, Obama, Bush 2, Clinton, Bush 1, on and on. Just power structure props in the play. Some of these actors are likely not even truly aware of the parts they're playing for those in power. Perhaps this is the case even for Mr. Trump. Just for the record, the U.S. empire has 52,000 troops in Japan, 28,000 troops in South Korea. The U.S. and NATO are carrying out war games on the borders of China and Russia. Would Americans tolerate China and Russia doing the same on our borders? Who's prodding who in this equation? If Americans want to have any chance of avoiding World War III, which would certainly be the final conflict, the total hypocrisy of blindly obedient and unquestioning so-called patriotism must be abandoned. More headlines. WikiLeaks unveiled Vault 7, the largest ever publication of confidential CIA documents. Another Snowden emerges. That's the end of that headline. Corporate media is doing their best to cover up this critical story. A total of 8,761 documents have been published as part of the Year Zero, the first in a series of leaks the whistleblower organization WikiLeaks has dubbed Vault 7. WikiLeaks said that Year Zero revealed details of the CIA's global covert hacking program, including weaponized exploits used against company products, including Apple's iPhone, Google's Android, and Microsoft's Windows, and even Samsung's TVs, which are turned into covert microphones. Another profound revelation is this, that the CIA can engage in false flag cyber attacks which portray Russia as the assailant. How do we believe anything our government does? Why would we believe that they're not engaged in all forms of activity to try to fuel and foment global conflict for the benefit of the military-industrial complex? They can listen to us and watch us through our social media devices, our communications devices, and even our TVs, watching us in our homes. And Americans go on about their lives as if this is okay. What does it take? What does it take? And we have a government, of course, telling us that what we see in the skies above our heads is nothing to worry about. If that's the category you're in and you buy that lie, you're a part of the cancer. That's simple. Another headline, Sweden brings back the draft. World Socialist website states from that report, the reintroduction of forced military conscription in Sweden is taking place as the major imperialist powers are militarizing in preparation for a new world war. Exactly what I've been talking about during this program. To weave this into what's happening to our environment, as I have always stated, all this preparation ultimately comes down to a biosphere that's collapsing, not enough to go around, infighting within various factions of the power structure, but all because at the core, the planet's ability to support life is imploding, and those who are most afraid of their own mortality, those who pull the levers of power behind the curtain, the only thing they know how to do is start conflict, because they wield these weapons of mass destruction. And that's where we're headed. So back to the core of what's happening in the environment. From Climate News Network, legislators attempt to mine Amazon's riches. What's left of the Amazon, we should say. From that report, World Wildlife Federation, Brazil fears that a bill to open up more than 1 million hectares, that's about 2.5 million acres, of protected Amazon rainforest aims to facilitate industrial mining in the region. Back to the industrial military complex. From ABC News, carbon emissions are not soaked up by trees as well as initially thought, scientists state. What have I talked about on show after show after show? What's killing our trees? Bioavailable metal in the rain affects the root systems and causes those organisms, such as trees, to shut down nutrient uptake. The massive UV radiation level, also talked about in this show, is so intense on foliage, it causes trees to shut their stomata, their respiratory pores. They can't feed. They can't uptake carbon because they're being baked from above. The roots are being poisoned from below. The hydrological cycle has been completely disrupted. We're having more dry lightning strikes thanks to geoengineering, ionizing the atmosphere, making it more conductive, and again disrupting the hydrological cycle. From every direction, climate engineering is helping to fuel total planetary omnicide. So now we have scientists who are oblivious to the geoengineering elephant in the room, who are oblivious to the mountains of toxic heavy metal falling through our air column, saturating soils, killing trees. Now they're connecting the dots that a 10-year-old could connect if he had a few basic facts in front of him. And this is what we're paying academia to do, academia. And as I've stated in previous shows, how so many circles in academia betrayed the human race and the web of life on Earth by ignoring the climate engineering elephant in the room and all factors connected to it. So now a science panel is telling us that they're just figuring out that the trees are no longer absorbing CO2 properly. And major boreal forests are no longer carbon sinks, but they're becoming carbon sources, again, as they're burning to the ground as well. And that feeds other feedback loops, as I've stated in show after show. As climate engineering disrupts the hydrological cycle, more dry lightning, poison dead dying trees, UV radiation levels and so intense, also killing the forests. Forests burn, soot goes into the atmosphere, soot settles onto the ice deposits, making them darker, thus they absorb more thermal energy. The cycles continue, triggers feedback loop after feedback loop, all of which are superheating our planet at the rate already mentioned in this show, the rate equivalent to the thermal energy contained in 4 to 5 Hiroshima bombs per second. 400,000 a day, that's how fast our planet is heating up. On to more biosphere collapse headlines. Here's another. Mass death and extinction of the bees, exclamation point, will be catastrophic to mankind within 4 years, as many species have dropped by up to 90%. Let's add to that what I already stated about the ozone layer collapsing within the next 8 years. We have biosystems collapsing all over the globe, forcing those in power, or compelling, I should say, those in power to push us toward global conflict by making more and more weapons with what's left of Earth's waning resources. Does this not all add up to total collective insanity? It does. From that headline on the bees, in just 3 years' time, the world will have lost 2/3 of all wild animals. 3 years' time, by 2020. This amazing statistic from the Living Planet Index goes on. The number of wild animals living on Earth is set to fall by 2/3 by 2020, as I just stated, according to a new report. Part of a mass extinction that is destroying the natural world upon which humanity depends. If you think you're going to hear that kind of a headline from corporate media, or if you're in Redding, California, Shasta County, if you think you're going to hear that kind of a headline from KRCR or the Record Searchlight, think again. Another headline. Many at Fukushima now have brain damage. Worker develops 3 types of cancer in a year. Secret hospital is used to treat those sickened by radiation exposure. Hide it. That's what governments do. Hide it. Hide everything. From using Corexit in the Gulf of Mexico to sink the oil and hide it, thus making that situation 52 times worse, 52 times more toxic, literally, as reported by environmental impact reports. That's what governments do, hide the problem. That's a major aspect with climate engineering, by creating chemically nucleated winter events with, quote, warm and cold sides to winter storms like what's going to happen on the East Coast in the next few days. Moisture straight out of the Gulf of Mexico, very warm moisture, chemically nucleated, and thus lowering temperatures in some areas 50 and 60 degrees in a day. Connect the dots. We need to connect the dots. These are chemically nucleated events creating a cold, dense layer on the ground that lowers the mercury and makes everybody think winter's happening. Radical rebounds of temperature, radical weather whiplash, I should say, but it's to confuse and divide the population till the last possible moment as the walls bear down on all of us. Another headline from E! News. Mysterious cancer killing sea lions along U.S. West Coast. Bones turning to, quote, mush. Inside, there's just masses of yellow cancerous tissue, end quote. Animals dying at a, quote, alarming rate. The disease starts in the reproductive organs. By the time they die, tumors have sometimes infiltrated their backbones and turned vertebrae to mush. Tinya Norris, a scientist at the Marine Mammal Center, said. She describes examining one dead animal whose spine she could simply slice through. More than a quarter of the adult California sea lions that die at the Marine Mammal Center suffer from cancer, says the director of veterinary science, Sean Johnson. That's just one of the highest cancer rates seen in any wild animal in the history of the planet. There's been a surge of sick animals, especially off California coast. It goes on and on and on. This is happening now. It's important to remember that not only do we have Fukushima contaminating not just the Pacific, but that will spread around the globe, we have our own military using depleted uranium ammunition, highly toxic, highly radioactive ammunition for practice off the whole North American West Coast. As I've stated in previous shows, I spoke to the Navy's PR director myself, who didn't seem to know why. That alarmed me. Collective insanity, top to bottom. U.S. military-industrial complex completely out of control and helping to kill our planet. Another headline from IFL Science News. Fukushima is turning into a robot graveyard after multiple probe failures. These are the robots they're sending in to try to find out what's going on. From this report, the 4 trillion yen, which is $35 billion, cleanup at Fukushima isn't going smoothly. The former nuclear power station is quickly turning into a robot graveyard due to the recurrent failures with the remote-controlled probes sent inside. Does that sound like nuclear power is free? $35 billion cleanup, and that figure is just drawn out of a hat. There's no end to Fukushima. There is no known technology to fix or stop Fukushima. And even if you could turn it off right now with no more nuclear emissions being spewed out of the triple nuclear volcano there, even if you could shut it off now, the damage already done is cataclysmic and irreparable. This must be considered. Another headline, pollution responsible for a quarter of deaths of young children, says World Health Organization. From that report, pollution is responsible for 1 in 4 deaths among all children under 5, according to a new World Health Organization reports, with toxic air, unsafe water, and a lack of sanitation the leading causes. The report found polluted environments cause the deaths of 1.7 million children every year. Quote from this report, "A polluted environment is a deadly one, particularly for young children," says Dr. Margaret Chan, Director General for World Health Organization. Quote, "Their developing organs and immune systems and smaller bodies and airways make them especially vulnerable to dirty air." What a surprise that is. And we have quote-unquote public safety entities like EPA firing their employees, like the one I reported on some weeks back that we're working directly with, federal EPA District 6 employee fired for trying to bring to light aluminum contaminating precipitation, which he connected directly to geoengineering, as we have for over a decade at geoengineeringwatch.org. And we have agencies that do not report on this. And as I've also stated in previous shows, high-level EPA meetings I've attended, a meeting at Sacramento with 5 top EPA people, closed-door meeting arranged by a congressional rep, and told to my face the system is rigged, and they are told what to test for and what not to test for. They test for combustion particulates only. The rest of the samples go out the window, and they don't care what's in those samples. They don't care. Those agencies are designed to hide this. So when we have a stated official figure of nearly 2 million children dying every year from respiratory ailments. And yes, there's multiple sources. I don't deny that. We have coal burning facilities. We have all sorts of forms of aerosol atmospheric pollution. But when we know we have deliberate climate intervention programs that put so much material in the sky, they can blot out the entire sun from horizon to horizon with the dirty, dingy, cobwebby looking laced in trails. Does anybody stop to consider how much material it takes to blot out the entire sun, and that these are highly toxic materials showing up on our rainfall, and no official agency is reporting this, and they're raising the quote-unquote safe limits in the case of aluminum sky high, so that the limits have to be unimaginably high to have broken any quote-unquote law? The whole system is set up this way, and if you're an academician or an agency person and you're a part of this system, you're contributing to planetary omnicide. How do you look in the mirror? Will you please consider coming clean? Make the decision to refuse to participate in the cancer that is consuming the planet and that will soon strip all of us, including our children, of any potential future. Continuing from this report from the World Health Organization, WHO announced in May that air pollution around the world is rising at an alarming rate, with virtually all cities in poorer nations blighted by unhealthy air and more than half of those in richer countries also suffering. We're absolutely suffering in the richer countries, which are being geoengineered horrifically. And as I reported at geoengineeringwatch.org, and anyone listening to the show that hasn't seen it should also review that, we now have a report, a peer-reviewed report stating that the rich, industrialized, militarized nations are not warming as rapidly as the poorer nations. Now, how can that possibly be? Short of geoengineering being the primary factor in that equation, that's a virtual impossibility. Why would you magically have wealthy, militarized, industrialized nations warming at a slower pace than poorer countries? Unless those more wealthy nations and their militaries were engaged in even heavier climate engineering programs over those wealthier nations to confuse and divide those populations, to mask the total global meltdown from them as long as possible. How could you have such a scenario otherwise without geoengineering? The wealthy, militarized nations warming at a slower pace than the poorer nations. So that means that the people in the wealthy nations are inhaling the materials from climate engineering at an extremely alarming rate, and these materials are not being reported by official agencies for all the reasons I've already mentioned. Massive amounts of people are dying from respiratory ailment. Final statements from this report. Research in 2015 revealed that more than 3 million people a year die early because of outdoor air pollution, more than malaria, HIV, AIDS combined. Chan, the World Health Organization director, told the BBC this, that air pollution is one of the most pernicious threats facing global public health today and is on a much bigger scale than HIV or Ebola. Not being reported by many media sources, is it? Another headline: White House proposed cuts to NOAA will undermine science and weather forecasting vital for businesses, military, and states. Why would they fire the scientists? Why would they undercut these programs? For all the reasons I've already mentioned. To help to hide what's really going on. That's exactly why. And though I don't like the EPA, of course, or NOAA, or NASA, all of them are being used for disinformation because we have too many academicians willing to say or do whatever they're told for a paycheck or pension. The bottom line is this: NASA, NOAA, National Weather Service are radically under-reporting the severity of what's happening in our climate. They're not paid to over-report or exaggerate the degree of warming. They are under-reporting, and we have verified this with temperature readings all over the country. Under-reporting of temperatures, not over-reporting as so many people want to convince themselves, under-reporting of temperatures. So how do you further hide what's happening? How do you further hide climate engineering? You simply start to gut these agencies. And the few people that were willing to try to tell the truth, like the EPA director, as I just mentioned again previously, who's been fired for trying to tell the truth, when you start gutting these whole agencies, no one's willing to step forward. From that report, the Trump administration has taken a hostile anti-science approach across the board on many issues, from pollution control to climate change, for all the reasons I just mentioned. And the proposed cuts to the NOAA budget continue as a trend. As a former NOAA scientist, from a person who penned this report, I am confident that the data collected by NOAA is not a Democrat or Republican issue. We use it on our daily lives, and ignoring the facts of science and climate change doesn't change them, doesn't make it go away. Climate engineering is the most critical issue they are trying to hide. Another headline from the New York Times: EPA head stacks agency with climate change skeptics. Who would want us to believe there's nothing wrong with the climate? The military-industrial climate engineering complex. What's the point of climate engineering? A primary point. There's many agendas being carried out, and all of them nefarious. But a primary objective is to mask or hide the severity of the unfolding global meltdown by engineering chemically nucleated cooldowns. That's the only way the temperatures can swing 50, 60 degrees in a day or less. If you don't know what chemical ice nucleation is for weather modification, please look it up. If you think this can't be done, please search Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorms. As I've stated in so many shows, and I hope people take the time to look this up, Fox News, Popular Science, all covered it. If we know the Chinese are routinely doing this, do we really think our military is not doing this? What an incredibly naive notion. And I've heard this so many times. Our government wouldn't do this to us, really. Time to wake up and recheck your reality, if that's what you think. So to try to make this clear again, as the Trump administration stacks agencies with those who are part of the military-industrial climate engineering complex to help hide the severity of what's unfolding till the last possible moment. That's what plugs directly into this headline from the New York Times that I just read. EPA head stacks agency with climate change skeptics. Now let's add this headline. Scientists could end up flying blind about Arctic sea ice at the worst possible time. More examples of gutting the agencies who are tasked with reporting frontline data because they want to hide that data, because they want to hide the severity of what's unfolding from the population, that the planet's imploding, the ecosystems are imploding, food stocks are crashing, crops are crashing, fisheries are crashing. Hide it till the last possible moment. That's the goal. So with the headline I just read, scientists could end up flying blind about Arctic sea ice at the worst possible time. From that report, all is not well in the Arctic, where sea ice is in a long-term precipitous decline due to human-caused global warming. Again, climate engineering making that situation worse overall, not better. The attempt to hide the imploding Arctic with chemical ice nucleation and stratospheric aerosol geoengineering is making a bad situation worse, not better. The report continues. In February, for example, Arctic sea ice set a monthly record low, with sea ice extent coming in nearly 500,000 square miles below the February 1981 to 2010 average. That means that at the end of February, the Arctic was missing an ice chunk the size of Texas, California, and West Virginia combined. Final passage from that report: scientists who have been shocked at the rapid climate change taking place in the Arctic and at this unusually warm winter in particular, say they are worried about losing important monitoring tools that help them determine what's going on. That's the point. That's what Trump's doing. That's what the military-industrial complex is doing, trying to put the blinders on as long as possible. And for those who think Antarctica is at record high ice, as so many have so incorrectly reported, please check. I'm asking everyone to investigate what I state, not to believe me. Antarctic sea ice also at all-time record low. Another headline, White House statement has language that is nearly identical to an Exxon press release. Is that a surprise when we have top oil executive Rex Tillerson at the helm? Why would that be a surprise? They're joined at the hip. The military, industrial, fossil fuel, geoengineering complex all joined at the hip. If you think otherwise, and so many people are still clinging to this notion that Mr. Trump is somehow a caped crusader that's going to save us all, and this doesn't mean that Hillary Clinton was in any sense a solution. She's simply part of a crime cabal as well. But it doesn't change the fact we have Trump now, and those are still clinging to this completely baseless notion that Mr. Trump is not also a part of the problem. He is, and every action he is taking is proving that, absolutely proving that. From that report on the Exxon similarities with the press release, hours after President Donald Trump was scheduled to have lunch with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson on Monday, the White House issued an unusual press release. Trump congratulated ExxonMobil, the company Tillerson formerly led, on its announcement that it would be spending $20 billion to expand investments in 11 Gulf state projects. The oil and gas giant claims the move will create 45,000 jobs. How much will those jobs matter on a planet that doesn't support life? And that's exactly where we're headed. Final statement from that report. As if the close ties between the White House and Exxon weren't clear enough, one part of the White House statement contains language that is nearly identical to language in Exxon's press release. What a surprise. Another headline. From Reuters News, climate change is a threat, but it won't hurt me, Americans say. Doesn't that plug into everything I've just gone over? Gut the agencies, gut the ability for the scientists that are still honest within those agencies to sound the alarm, fire the ones that try to sound the alarm, and chemically nucleate some winter storms, quote unquote, from Gulf of Mexico moisture. That's exactly what's happening in the coming few days and just happened in some parts of the U.S. Gulf of Mexico moisture somehow producing, quote, winter storms causing temperature swings of 50 and 60 degrees. So we end up with Americans that don't believe that the imploding climate will hurt them because food's being imported from all over the world, from countries that are starving, to stock our shelves up, to make Americans think everything's fine because, as I've stated so many times, Big Macs are still available at McDonald's. All is well until it's not. From that headline, London, March 1st, from the Reuters Foundation, 7 in 10 Americans believe global warming is happening, but less than half think it will harm them personally. According to a new Yale University study, how many Americans care at all about the toxic aerosol climate engineering that's contaminating every breath they take? While they're getting sicker, while they're getting less cognitively functional, how many people even bother to look off their iPhones and look up? And we must change that. We must all work together to change that. It's imperative. Another headline. Arctic Circle could become completely free of ice, even if global warming were limited to 2 degrees Celsius. First, because of the underreporting of temperatures, all available data indicates we're past the 2 degrees C warming threshold, that we are already likely past 3.5 degrees C. That's past the point at which humans have existed on this planet. It's past the baseline at which humans have existed. And that doesn't mean the consequences of being past that manifest overnight, but they're manifesting at blinding speed. What this headline also means is you could shut every form of anthropogenic activity off right now, including climate engineering. We're already through the guardrail, and we are in uncharted territory. The planet we have known will never return. If we're lucky, we can salvage a planet that still supports life, but only if we all work together immediately. Another headline, loss of sea ice could have catastrophic effects on weather in much of the northern hemisphere and thus speed up global warming. We also have to put climate engineering into that for all the reasons already stated in this show, helping to fuel forest burn downs, which helps to put soot and CO2 in the atmosphere. That soot settles on the ice and further speeds up the melting of that ice. Geoengineering destroys the ozone layer, allowing even more thermal energy to penetrate the planet. Many, many issues related to climate engineering not mentioned by academia. The betrayal of academia. Another headline, sea ice hits record lows at both poles, from Scientific American. Please look it up. If you're in the anti-geoengineering community and you're operating off total ideology that because Al Gore said it's warming, we have to take the opposite position on everything he said, that's not logical or rational, and it's not helpful for our cause. Credible conclusions help our cause. Ideological and completely incorrect conclusions don't help our cause. Another headline, Ocean State, which is Rhode Island, sea level rise estimate now above 9 feet. Not a few inches, 9 feet. From that report, to put it in perspective, we've had 10 inches of sea level rise during the last 90 years. We're about to have 10 feet of sea level rise in the next 80 years, said Grover Fugate, Executive Director of Rhode Island's Coastal Resource Management Council. And that estimate of nearly 10 feet is also radically short of how bad it really is. Back to why the climate engineers, the power structure, are doing everything they can to hide reality from the population as long as possible. In Rhode Island, Representative Justin Price, very courageous, one of the very, very few in our government, very courageous, that just pinned proposed legislation to expose and stop climate engineering in Rhode Island. My deepest gratitude to Justin Price. I hope everyone looks at that full document, available under the recent section of GeoengineeringWatch.org. Another headline, massive ice crack on Antarctic Peninsula points to faster sea level rise. Again, as the ice breaks apart, as the cleats that hold back the glaciers break apart and fall into the oceans, happening right now, an iceberg that's 6,500 square kilometers about to break off. All of this starts to feed into positive feedback loops to further fuel the planetary meltdown and sea level rise, and climate engineering in the attempt to try to hide this from the public, making it far worse, not better. Another headline, Trump's cuts to NOAA could impede tracking of sea level rise. On every front, Trump is trying to block any flow of information that would awake the population. Another headline, latest wildfires prompt Oklahoma emergency declaration. Wave of wildfires break out across not only the U.S., but Australia. How many red flags do we need? And at the same time, here's a headline from New Zealand. New Zealand deluge with record flooding. It's the drought, deluge, record heat, chemically nucleated snowfall, climate chaos, weather whiplash, all being fueled and made worse by climate engineering. And for those who like to claim that such frequent and drastic weather-related natural disasters have always happened and that we just didn't know about them, this is statistically a total fallacy. What's happening now on planet Earth is unprecedented. Scientific American headline, why global warming can mean harsher winter weather. Also not true. Statistics show that a warming planet should not have these radical cool downs. But why are they happening? Because of climate engineering, chemically nucleated cool downs, which the academic community refuses to speak about. I'm just about out of time. I need to summarize. As I've stated in a previous show, according to Reuters and other sources, credible sources, 20 million people are expected to die of hunger in the next 6 months. Headline that relates to that here. Many people every day are dying from hunger in Somalia as severe drought threatens millions. 363,000 acutely malnourished children. Climate engineering is the single greatest drought-causing factor on the planet. They are totally disrupting the hydrological cycle. Geoengineering causes drought, period. And that doesn't mean deluge doesn't happen. Doesn't mean that. When you have a climate system that's being intervened with, you get extremes in every direction. But we must consider climate engineering and climate intervention programs, solar radiation management is the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all right now. Not negating all the other anthropogenic factors of damage to the climate. But we must expose and stop climate engineering. And in summary, let's consider this. Our planet is a spaceship of sorts. Is this not true? Would any sane individual consider it okay to do what we're doing to our planet and its life support processes? Would you poke holes in the side of your spaceship or leave your trash and toxic waste everywhere inside that spaceship? How long do you think you would survive? Not long. Not long. All of us are needed to help reach a critical mass of climate engineering awareness, without which we have no chance of winning this battle. Activist instructions and suggestions are listed in detail on the homepage of GeoengineeringWatch.org and at the end of every single article posted by Geoengineering Watch in the form of clickable hyperlinks. If we can reach a critical mass of awareness, we have a real chance at stopping the insanity in our skies. If we can expose the weather warfare assault, so many other crimes of the power structure will also come to the full light of day with this exposure. Do your part. Help with the battle to pull back the curtain. Make your voice heard while it still matters. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with GeoengineeringWatch.org.